If Parashat Parashat deals with the construction of the world, then Parashat Noach deals with the deconstruction. In a certain sense, the rabbis addressed this when they said that God created worlds and destroyed them. It could be in our minds when we hear such a statement that we imagine about worlds in other places, or perhaps about ancient civilizations. But over here, that's really what happened. A world is created, and then, regrettably, a world is destroyed. The narrative of the Torah tells us that it is, in fact, the behavior of man which causes this natural disaster to take place. There are various midrashim that speak about in the future the people discern that it was a natural disaster, and they try to disassociate this from their own behavior. What's interesting is the use of the water. Towards the very beginning of the Torah, it tells us how the water was gathered. It's the same word which we use when we describe a different type of gathered water, and that's called a mikveh, where the water is gathered. We therefore get this sense that this incredible surge of water came to purify a world which had become impure and corrupt. What's interesting about the way that it's described, as the rains are about to come, God commands Noach to go and gather the animals. He commands him twice, 2 by 2, later on again, 7 by 7, in terms of the pure animals. And in both cases, it talks about how the animals came and did what God had commanded Noach to do. Which seems to be that there is this really interesting dichotomy, that as nature is about to fall apart, parts of nature come together. Man and animals, which very often have this tension between them, as actually was expressed towards the very end of Parashat, at least in the sense of the serpent. Now they realize that they really have the same plight, and they come together. As the scene of the flood comes towards its end, there is this description of the dove, the Yonah, the dove which is a symbol of peace. The dove flies away and then returns to the hand of Noach. Then again it flies away to finally be free. Which means when nature falls apart, elements of nature come together. When nature returns to its natural form, then the forms of nature return back to their sense. We need to be careful, however, when we think about what took place over here. God created a natural disaster, which I guess if God did it, it's not a natural disaster. It is a disaster which was not natural, but rather was with nature. Which means when God micromanages and causes a disaster to happen, that's not a natural disaster. But the reason we need to be careful with this is that when nature does things, even though we need to always look for the hand of God in our lives, in terms of the human response, it's complex. Because on the one hand, we have to ask ourselves, when it's we are suffering, what did we do that God did this to us? But when someone else is suffering, we never equate someone else's suffering with sin. If we did, we would never give charity. We would never give tzedakah. We would look at the person who is downtrodden, the person who is in pain, the person who is poor, and say, well, obviously this is the hand of God. This is the will of God. How dare I go and rebel against God if God deemed this person to be poor, this person to be sick, this person to be in pain? But our response is the opposite. When we see things that took place, natural disasters, natural things that took place, we respond in a compassionate way. And that's what the Jewish ethic is. When something happens to us personally, we question and say, okay, what can I do? And did God micromanage in this case? Which means when things happen to this world, the response of Jews is compassion and introspection. Sometimes people do the opposite. They have no compassion, and instead of introspection, they accuse others of being sinners. That's not the Jewish way.